EU ambassadors have held an emergency meeting in Brussels, viewers. Now the European Commission is set to issue an official update later during the day. Trump said Washington will impose a 10% tariff on goods from several European countries starting the 1st of February. He said the tariffs would increase to 25% on June unless an agreement was reached for the US to purchase Greenland. European leaders have reiterated that the threat undermines relationship between allies. European Council President Antonio Costa says EU leaders are ready to continue talks with the US but will defend themselves against pressure. Meanwhile, protests have taken place in Greenland and Denmark with demonstrators opposing any US takeover. But first, let's listen in to Danish Foreign Minister and US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent.
Og der noterer mig jo også bare, at den amerikanske præsident er ukonventionel, for at udtrykke det diplomatisk, men Amerika er også andet og mere end den amerikanske præsident. Jeg har lige været der. Der er også checks and balances i det amerikanske samfund, og det giver mig sådan set en tro på, at når vi står sammen, og når vi er i stand til at forklare, hvad der står på spil, og det er jo ikke kun for Europa, der er ting på spil, der er også store ting på spil for USA, så skal vi også komme igennem det her. Altså, det er man jo nødt til at tro på, og det er man jo nødt til at arbejde for.
We are not going to outsource our national security. We are not going to outsource our hemispheric security to other countries.
This meeting of EU ambassadors, an opportunity to get on the same page to digest the developments over the weekend and President Trump's announcement that he is prepared to impose tariffs on 8 European powers should Greenland not be given over to the United States. Now, officials I've spoken to say this is also an exercise in coordination in potential next steps. We have had a statement released by these European powers impacted or potentially impacted by these duties, and in it they say they're calling for further dialogue. They have dismissed Donald Trump's claims that they're acting dangerously by increasing their military coordination with Denmark, saying that they pose no threat at all. They've also warned that the risk of tariffs that would start at 10% next month, going up to 25% in June, would create a downward spiral in the transatlantic relationship. When it comes to further action the European Union could take, well, we know that several political parties are calling for a blockage of ratifying the EU-US trade pact that was brokered last summer, and some are calling for even more explosive action, with French President Emmanuel Macron calling for the so-called trade bazooka to be used, essentially giving the EU the powers to impose tariffs of its own on the United States, a move that would likely further antagonise the United States.
The Danish armed forces are expanding their presence in Greenland. That's correct. The troops received weapons handling lessons at the shooting range in extreme weather conditions. The soldiers are deployed in Greenland as part of the Arctic endurance exercise. Various other NATO partners are also participating in the same drills. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said he would impose 10% sweeping tariffs on 8 European countries that oppose his efforts to take over Greenland, eliciting a forceful response from the continent. Here's a report.
And I may do that for Greenland too. I may put a tariff on countries if they don't go along with Greenland, because we need Greenland for national security.
What began as a bizarre obsession has now erupted into a full-blown transatlantic crisis. US President Donald Trump's mania for Greenland is no longer just empty words. It is now driving a tariff war with Europe. After months of repeated claims demanding that the US must own Greenland and autonomous Danish territory for its national security, the US President's fixation has now escalated from rhetoric to retaliation. After European allies pushed back, Trump used his favorite tool, tariffs, imposing sweeping duties on key allies such as France, UK, Denmark, unless they agree to negotiate with the US for control over Greenland. 10% tariffs first, then 25%. The message is clear: comply or pay. The response was loud and clear. Europe will not be blackmailed, with leaders of key NATO allies, Denmark, France, UK, warning that Trump's plan risks a dangerous downward spiral.
Norges standpunkt ligger fast. Vi kommer ikke til å la oss presse, og den type trusler uakseptable mellom nære allierte.
Volevo dirvi che la previsione di un aumento dei dazi nei confronti di quelle nazioni che hanno scelto di contribuire alla sicurezza della Groenlandia, secondo me è un errore.
Thousands have taken to the streets across Denmark, Greenland and Europe, protesting against Trump's plans. Europe is already considering retaliatory action, with France leading the charge. French President Emmanuel Macron is pushing for EU's trade bazooka, or the anti-coercion instrument, a tool that would allow Europe to impose sweeping tariffs on the US, restrict American investment and retaliate across multiple sectors. Greenland has become the trigger, but the stakes are far bigger. With threats and coercion replacing diplomacy, the big question is, will NATO alliance survive Trump's mayhem, and at what cost? With Dishha Bagchi, NDTV Bureau Report.